The chances of finding it hadn't been very good. Maybe no one would notice the stuff. But here it was, a message left by Maomao. Perhaps she had relied on the likelihood that Liu Humen would figure it out. The others were starting to see why she admired him so much. Now Liu Humen took out the piece of paper. Surely it must have some significance, even though there was nothing written on it. Liu Humen said, "This is a little game she always used to love." He lit a candle from an asbestos-wrapped flint, the room filled with a rich aroma of honey. He took the paper and singed it slightly. Then letters appeared on it. The flame quickly became very eager, and Liu Humen jerked the page away from the fire. He explained that if you write on a piece of paper using fruit juice or tea, the letters are slightly more flammable than the paper itself. Therefore, they appear when the surface is passed over a flame. On this occasion, it would appear she used alcohol. "Ah, yes, she did take some of our distilled spirits with her," the doctor piped up. It would have been nice of him to mention that sooner. In any case, that meant the writing caught fire first, making it visible. And regarding the message they could now see, the doctor said, "Is that the character for small shrine? It is too messy to read. I think you let it burn too much." Liu Humen said, "My apologies," though it had not really been under his control. The paper contained only 2 characters, the one for roadside shrine, and one more. That was likely all Maomao could write in the time she had. This at least supported the idea that she had been kept from returning to the Jade Pavilion. This subtle method was the best she could do to let them know what was happening. "Are there any shrines in that area?" Liu Humen asked. "We are going to find out," Jinshi said. The shrine of choosing was just the beginning. The northern quarter had many old buildings. There might be a shrine or 2 there, but even Jinshi, who had been in and around the rear palace for years, could not be sure. Then there was the other character on the piece of paper, almost legible and tantalizing. It was a bit of a shapeless blob. Perhaps Maomao had tried to use a simplified form to save time. It did not help that whatever she had written had been partially blackened by the flame. "What could it be?" Jinshi muttered. "I'm afraid I haven't the slightest idea," the doctor said. "Perhaps they should try the Jade Pavilion. Gyokaiu or the others might be able to shed some light on it. I don't know how much hope we can hold out though," Jinshi said. "I wonder." Liu Humen blew out the candle and calmly put it away. He seemed unhurried, unlike the fidgety and anxious doctor. Jinshi asked, "Are you not worried about her?" Could Liu Humen, despite his gentle appearance, actually have a heart of stone? He replied, "I am worried, but I will simply do what I can do. I wouldn't want the tasks I must attend to suffer because I was in a tizzy." He began taking out some medicines. Besides, he once went an entire year without a word from her. Jinshi was quiet. Liu Humen must have meant the year after his daughter had been taken by the lady hunters. What could Jinshi do in the face of such a remark but keep his peace? He remembered when Maomao was a maid, working and unable to communicate easily with people in the pleasure district. This made him realize that father and daughter did share some strange similarities. He could see that even without Maomao present, he did not need to worry about consort Gyokaiu. If she wanted a food taster, he was prepared to offer suin again. He imagined the ladies of the Jade Pavilion would likely reject that idea, however. Hongyang herself had looked practically terrified. Jinshi left the medical office, moving quicker than usual as he made for Gyokaiu's residence. Master Jinshi Gaoshan was looking at him sourly. "I know." He slowed down to a regal walk, greeting the occasional smiles from the women who passed by with graciousness, the perfect noble. "Sloppy writing," Hongyang remarked, scrunching up her brow. "I would say it was more like written hurriedly without the time for careful calligraphy." The scorches do not help, but the characters themselves are a bit blobby. This cool assessment came from Gyokaiu. Princess Lingli was by her feet playing with wooden blocks. The consort grumbled. "I wonder what it could say. I think it looks a little like the character for wings." No. The bottom half of the character does not have enough space for that. Yes, but Maomao's writing has always had a certain peculiar charm. Then perhaps a fresh set of eyes, or 3, could help to decipher the writing. Hongyang promptly summoned the other ladies in waiting. However, even Yinghua, Giyuan and Ailan weren't able to agree on what they were seeing. "Oh, I think it says next." That's close, but I don't quite think so." "Yeah, I feel like there's more to it than that." Then the lady in waiting with the white hairband spoke up. "It looks like wings or next to me too." I agree with my sister, said the woman with the black hairband. The last of them, the girl with the red hairband, was staring at the paper as if her gaze might burn a hole right through it. Don't you think this says Jade? She asked. That character certainly did look that way, a bit like a cross between the ones for wings and next. See here, it is a little swoopier than usual. Normally this stroke would be straight down. Yes, I could see it. But what do you suppose it means? Gyokyo said. Is it a reference to the Jade Pavilion? The debate started immediately. Maybe, but what would be the point of referring to this place? Meanwhile, Sekiyu was scrunching up her nose. Shisui, she said suddenly. Everyone stopped and looked at her. She shivered under their collective gaze. What's that? It's a name. The maid's name was one Maomao knew well. It was not an unusual name. It was often written with characters meaning purple and jade, or offspring and jade. It could be the name of almost anyone in the rear palace, but Jinchi remembered someone else when he heard that character sway. I believe there was a girl called Zyrolan who was often with them, he said. He had seen them together before. There was a palace woman who looked like a friendly squirrel. He was surprised to realize Maomao was actually friends with some other girls. Find that serving woman, he commanded his eunuchs. They immediately left the room. Geishun, said Master Jinchi. Jinchi suddenly realized his face was hard set. His fists were clenched so tightly that his nails were leaving impressions in his palms. He tried to put his mask back on, but he did not have much success. Later, a shrine was discovered near where they had found the kitten. The dilapidated construct was tucked in the shadow of a storehouse. It might have remained hidden forever if no one had been specifically looking for it. The shrine was the entrance to a tunnel. This passage was constructed from one of the old, unused waterways. They learned one more thing. No women were registered in the rear palace with the name Sekiyu had chosen. Shisui was nowhere to be found, and one of the new eunuchs was missing as well. Chapter 11, The Fox Village. Maomao could feel them being carried along by the current. The rocking. She leaned against a post, somehow managing to fight off a wave of nausea. She must have been in the ship's hold because she was surrounded by cargo. The entire place smelled damp and humid. Wonder where we're going, Shisui said, and she did not sound unduly concerned. Your guess is as good as mine. They were not restrained, but Suhari, still in her male outfit, stood guard outside. Maomao and Shisui were no longer dressed as palace women. They wore simple clothes, much like those worn by village girls. Suhari had anticipated questions from the sailors on the ship. He explained that the two young women were to be sold. Pretending to be a procurer was a very natural cover for her. It was a good excuse to lock them in the hold and prevent anyone from asking questions. They were on a ship, which meant they were not at the rear palace. They were outside. Back at the clinic, Maomao had decided to accept Suhari's conditions. She had been alone and defenseless. If she had chosen to resist, the other woman would probably have silenced her permanently. That is to say, she was certainly not merely drawn in by the thought of the resurrection drug. Thank you very much. Thus, Maomao had allowed Suhari to lead her away. The eunuchs were busy with their work and hadn't noticed her. A palace woman walking around wasn't anything unusual anyway. Suhari led her to a place not far from where they had first found Maomao the kitten. It was close behind a wall. Maomao finally began to breathe a little easier. Shenel kept watch while Suhari worked on something at the shrine. It was during that brief moment that Maomao had scrawled her message in alcohol on the paper. She concealed the items in her robe as they left. Shisui had asked Maomao, causing her to mess up the second character and making it hard to read. She was applying more alcohol to her finger, hoping to rewrite the message when Suhari turned around. Maomao quickly stuffed the paper in the knot of a nearby tree. She pressed the catnip on top of it to keep it there. I really hope my old man notices that, she thought. If she had done anything to get his attention, he would not stop until he had discovered everything. That was just his nature. Sadly, the only person who had seen Maomao take the catnip was the quack doctor, so she was not very confident about how things would turn out. It wasn't the quack's fault. He was what he was, but that didn't bring her any comfort. Beneath the shrine was a hole large enough for a person to fit into. If nothing else, she finally knew how the kitten had gotten into the rear palace. It appeared to be a gloomy and uncared-for water passage, but it seemed a little larger than that. Maomao thought that whoever had built the underground water system had also made some emergency escape paths. They went through the tunnel to the outside of the rear palace. A horse and carriage was already waiting for them there, and they took it directly to the port. They cast off onto the sea, and now Maomao was rocking on her way to who knew where. She had no idea what was going to happen to them. Wondering if she ought to do anything, Maomao glanced at Shisui. Could she figure out some way for the two of them to escape together? She doubted it, thinking as she tugged at some sailcloth nearby. The cloth was dusty and stiff, but she could roll it up to make a passable pillow. It looked likely to have ticks, so she gave it a good pounding, partly just to make herself feel better. They gave her new clothes and took all her alcohol. She was left with only her hair stick, which was still in her hair. Sleepy? Shisui asked. Yeah, me too. She laid her head on the edge of the sailcloth, and for once the notorious chatterbox didn't make a sound. The boat seemed to have left the sea and entered a river. The smell of spray had lessened. It was replaced by a more noticeable aroma of earth. They changed boats twice as the river became narrower. When they finally made landfall, they discovered they were in the middle of a forest. The river flowed directly into the lake, and someone had constructed a dock within the woods. It is time to walk, Suhari announced, and Maomao and Shisui followed her. The girls' hands were tied with rope that was too thick to easily break without a knife. Along with Suhari, they were accompanied by two men who clearly looked like guards. Rope or no rope, Maomao doubted they could have escaped. This does not make any sense. From the position of the sun and the way the temperature had dropped, the boat had clearly been travelling north. But as they worked their way through the woods, she thought she felt herself getting warmer. An unaccountable clamminess entered the air. This way. Suhari, still in disguise, looked like a prince who had walked off the scroll of some fairy tale. She could have made a perfect couple with the pretty young Shisui, at least if the latter could have managed to act more demure. Shisui, for her part, was looking this way, and that at all the bugs that darted by as they walked along. Maomao thought she wasn't as far gone as Shisui. Still, she kept an eye out for interesting herbs and grasses as they went. Her thoughts were interrupted when Suhari flinched back. Then he edged to the left. What's with her? Maomao wondered. Shisui immediately shifted to the right. Maomao eyed them both, perplexed. Then a snake slithered out from among the trees. It was big and fat and ready for the approaching winter. Is she afraid of snakes? That would make sense enough. Everyone has something that bothers them, no matter how calm they seem. Maomao was particularly struck by how Shisui had reacted. It could have been a simple coincidence, but Maomao was beginning to form a strong hunch. Almost without thinking, Maomao left the path and grabbed the squirming reptile. Before the guards could move, she threw it at Suhari. It landed right at her feet. The woman began to sink down, her face deathly pale. Maomao, Shisui exclaimed, immediately grabbing the snake and flinging it away again. She stroked Suhari's back. The disguised woman looked strange, her pupils dilated and her breath coming in short gasps. Well, this isn't good, Maomao thought. She went over and touched Suhari's back. She didn't rub it but tapped on it slowly, silently encouraging her to breathe in time with the rhythm. Suhari's breath gradually slowed down. The guards moved toward the three of them, but Shisui held up a hand to stop them. That was when Maomao was sure. What the hell do you think you're doing? Suhari asked when she had finally calmed down. Just a little prank. It seemed like more than that. Suhari stood up and looked around, letting out a breath of relief when she was sure there were no more snakes nearby. So you and Shisui know each other, Maomao said. Suhari managed not to react openly to this accusation. I don't know what you're talking about. It seems to me Shisui received a higher class education than she lets on. And she occasionally betrays signs of good breeding. Someone like her would never do minion work like laundry. She would just hang around the baths, giving massages and liking bugs. She would give no hint that she was who she was. There are any number of maids like that. Just like you, Suhari said. Just like me, huh? Evidently she had done her homework about who Maomao was. I guess you must have been pretty surprised when a kitten appeared from your secret tunnel, Maomao said to Shisui. So surprised that in your haste to catch it you let yourself be discovered by another palace woman. Ha ha, you're a sharp one, Maomao, Shisui laughed. So you were trying to be sure. but please do not throw any more snakes around. My older sister really hates them." Shisui scratched her cheek with one of her bound hands. For the first time, Maomao thought she saw Suhari's expression soften. "I told you your name was too simple," she said, as if gently scolding the younger woman. There was no alarm in her tone. Instead, she seemed unbothered that Maomao now knew their secret. "Or none of the other girls noticed it," Shisui said. Many of the lowest-ranking serving women could not read, and would not spend much time thinking about another person's name. Even those who could read came from many different places. They might not all read a particular name in the same way. Shisui had likely counted on these assumptions when he chose it. A bold move. Maomao was about to say something else, but then she thought better of it. She still wasn't sure. She decided to skip it for now. Maomao had first met Shisui near where they found the kitten. They never figured out how Maomao the cat had gotten into the rear palace, but if she had come via a secret tunnel, that would explain a good deal. When they exited the old underground waterway, Maomao noticed a cat living nearby. This cat, Maomao again, must have gotten lost and wandered into the tunnel once when Shisui was looking for the passageway. Additionally, her upbringing seemed too refined for a mere maid. Shisui had been trying to act her part carefully, but she hadn't been careful enough. She probably hadn't expected anyone to watch her as closely as Maomao had. When Shisui started bringing Maomao and Zyrolan to the bathhouse, it was an excellent excuse to make contact with Suhari. Suhari was disguised as one of the eunuchs who brought the bathwater. She had played them all for fools. "Guess I'm not much of a spy," Shisui said. "Just have to be more careful next time," Maomao assured her, but the light banter did not change her position. She still had no idea what the other two planned to do with her. Did they want to use her as a bargaining chip against him? She thought of the strategist with the monocle and immediately frowned. It was like walking right into a snake pit. Nothing good could come of it. Didn't they realize that? Suhari asked, "Why did you come with us if you knew all that?" Maomao replied, "Why did you bring me?" She thought she could be allowed this small remark. She felt bolder knowing they weren't going to kill her right away. Suhari said nothing and continued walking. Maomao followed her. It seemed the matter would be set aside for now. They did cut the rope binding Maomao's hands. It wasn't because she was now welcome to try to escape. It was because any attempt at escape was obviously futile. They walked through the woods, crunching twigs and dry leaves underfoot. Eventually, something resembling a house came into view. It was flanked by what appeared to be fields. The trees began to thin out. Then they could see a clearing surrounded by a wooden palisade. Was this a hidden village? It certainly seemed like one. She would never have expected to find a human settlement out here in the woods, but there it was. The village was complete with a barrier to keep out wild animals. The palisade stretched around the perimeter of the village. It looked rather like the rear palace, even if on a different scale. Suhari produced a red cloth from the folds of her robe. She waved it 3 times at someone standing on a watchtower. A moment later, the gate opened and a bridge came down. Suhari led Shisui and Maomao into the village. Maomao was immediately hit by steamy air. No wonder it is warm. She saw steam everywhere, rising from water channels that crisscrossed the village. Is this a hot springs town? Why else would we build a village way out here? Shisui said. Well, there you had it. Other than the somewhat unusual location, the village looked like any other hot springs town. It was dotted with unremarkable buildings. People wearing light robes and carrying towels walked this way and that. One person in particular stood out. Was this person a foreigner? They wore a veil over their head. However, their build and the look of their hair made it obvious they weren't from around here. This impression was confirmed by the Western-style accessories they wore. What truly caught Maomao's attention was the tie in the hair that flowed out from under the veil. It was a red band, and it made her think of the emissaries who had come to this land. She was just thinking, could it be? When distracted by her thoughts, she bumped into someone. Hey, what do you think you're doing? Her antagonist was a child much smaller than her. He was an obnoxious child, probably just on the cusp of his teens, to judge by his attitude. What did you think was going to happen, standing there spaced out like that? Maomao was angry. Who wouldn't be? If this had been the pleasure district, she would already have given him a good knock on the head. but somehow she managed to restrain herself. She was going to be the adult in this situation. Interestingly, the little boy received a knock on the head anyway without Maomao having to do anything. "Ow," the kid yelped. "It's your fault for not watching where you were going," Shisui informed him. "Sis," so the little boy knew her. In an instant he had forgotten all about the bump on his head, running circles around her like an excited puppy. "Hey, and that's Suhari. What's with that outfit? It looks very hot on you." "Shut up," Suhari snapped, but the little one acted as if he hadn't heard her. "Granny said I wasn't going to see you two anymore, but I guess she was just pulling my leg. I should have known." The little one might have a bad attitude, but he looked like he came from a good family. He was wearing decent clothes and his hair was done properly.